When we think about that simplified process, when we think about it from the operational standpoint, it's about how we interact with the system from a single interface, an interface that anybody can understand. It doesn't require any specific type of regular programming knowledge or special types of knowledge to understand how to get this automation created. And it doesn't matter what we're creating, whether we're talking about the jobs themselves and creating the workflows, or you looking at calendars, if those are date and time types of workflows that need to be triggered. If we have to look backward at changes and see what changes were made to those individual definitions of those objects, all of those things can be done by operations in a single interface. When we think about it from the standpoint of what we can see, the views are consistent. They're vibrant. They're color-centric. You have the ability to see structure. You have the ability, in the perspective of the past, to play back what happened yesterday. So I can actually see when problems occurred, how much slack time there was. I can look at the log and output data from that given day's executions and see what happened. So I can do that root cause analysis inside the tool, or at least provide a certain amount of information back to the application developer from the automation tool about what actually occurred on that day. When we talk about what you see during the regular operation of the day, when I have my application workflows running and those things actually executing, all of that has the same type of view. And I can look at it job by job or in that service dashboard that we saw earlier, so I can actually see operationally what's going on and understand very, very quickly what's going on. And again, you don't have to sit in front of this console and hit a button and expect it to refresh. It's something that it will do on its own. And when we talk about looking at the future, understanding what happens when a material change in that workflow happens, I can ask the automation tool certain questions. We brought up that scenario earlier about someone having an application already built, already the automation in Control-M, and they realize that they're taking in tens of thousands more transactions in a given job. And in their testing, that job, when that test data was run, would cause that job to run twice its average duration. We have to be able to answer the question, what is the material impact of that change to the rest of the objects in the workflow? When are they going to run? How are they going to run? Are they going to miss their SLAs or not? All of that can be gathered from Control-M using the forecast capability, where I can actually see the structures, see the anticipated start and end times, and ask what-if questions. You'll notice at the bottom right-hand corner of that screen print where it says job runtime, I have a rule there that increases the job runtime of the HIPAA 26 job by 50%. That information, just that one rule, causes Control-M to give you better information about what's going to materially happen to that job and what's going to happen to it and its successors if that scenario occurs. I can see the anticipated start and end times with that rule in place. I can see its performance against its SLA on that given day in the case of those things that are being managed to a deadline. I can store these rules. So let's say that this happens every time I absorb a company, and I know that that job always runs at least 50% longer than it normally would when I take on a new company. I can store those rules and Control-M and apply them every single time without having to recode them, so that my forecasts give me good information about the material effect on these changes to the objects that I'm managing for that automation. When we think about the creation, it's really about templates, the ability to provide individual application developers with the templates that they would need to use to integrate to any of the third-party systems that you support or any of the third-party systems that an integration is created using Application Integrator. It's a drag-and-drop type of system. I drag those individual objects into the palette, I connect them together, and I have then my material workflow. This is what has to run when this application is doing some kind of processing. And the triggering of this work doesn't have to be day and time. It could be based on a file showing up. It could be based on an event happening on a message bus. It could be any number of things outside of Control-M's purview to get this kind of work started. All of these things are built to be simple so that the absolute lowest common denominator is I work with the object. I don't write a piece of code. I write just what I need for the application, not this full-blown large project that includes the 20 lines of code that I'm running in a Java executable and the 200,000 lines of code that I have to write to get it automated. Those things go away with Control-M. When we think about it from the standpoint of the application developer, that same object orientation exists where they can actually create the workflows themselves. I can provide them with a web access to this, where they can actually create the workflows or take in workflows that already exist and make changes to them. I can have this portion of Control-M enforce standards so that their job names come in the right format, their application and group names come in the right format, that they take away individual fields that they shouldn't be using that would be more apropos for the operations group to fill in for them, to stop them from creating objects that they shouldn't be creating. So if they're not supposed to be creating an FTP transfer, then I can take that object away from them and not have them have the ability to create that. All of this thought process gives the ability to create the automation and puts it in the application developer's hands. But once they create the automation, they can't apply it to Control-M directly. They would give that to operations for the appropriate change management process to occur so that someone is validating that what came across is right, that it follows the standards that you have in your shop, and that it actually will go into production in the right manner. Having this capability of taking Control-M's functionality and giving it to the application developer really gives them the ability to deliver that application faster. Because 80% of the work that they're doing is not about writing the actual object, or I should say writing the actual piece of functionality in the application. It's the 80% that they're using to create the automation. Now, with a web-based interface, the drag and drop curation, and the ability to work with new or existing jobs, I can develop that automation much more quickly. I can see how that automation interacts much more succinctly. I can make sure that the workflow that I'm building actually fits what my corporate standards are. And then it also improves the service level. Because every time they create something, it doesn't become an iterative thing between the application development person and the operations person, because they built it once already. They built it through the interface. They built it so that it follows the standards because the standards are being enforced by Control-M. They have that concept of workflow where they can actually build whatever workflows they need and then pass that over to the operations group for application to the workload automation tool, and even include notes about those things that they need, those things that they weren't sure about, those things that need to go into documentation, and so forth. It also allows rapid business change. If I have to change the executable, if I have to change the automation executable every time something happens, that's development time that gets consumed. That's time that is spent rewriting an automation script, testing that automation script, making sure that that automation script works in QA and UAT and all of those other individual development spots where we do those testing. And I also have the ability with Control-M to take away that need to do that. Because of the object orientation, because I can give them the ability to build their own flows, and also make sure that operations is that one spot where the real validation occurs before something goes into production for execution. So development sees what's on the left-hand side, their business sees everything else on the right-hand side. All the stuff that's really, really important outside of what they gave you, and how that structure would fit in the rest of the business. When we think about the audit and compliance piece of this, we have to think about that as well, because we don't want to not have a tracking mechanism to understand who did what to what applications. And I have the ability to see all of those things in Control-M. Whether I'm talking about the versions of the actual object definitions themselves and what changed between version 1 and version 2, or when I'm going out and actually looking at an audit report to see what actions were taken on a given day and time against any number of objects, either operationally or for other reasons, like checking them in for execution or making job changes. All of that information is collected by Control-M and is made available so that if there are issues and you are doing root cause analysis and you need to go down the path to find out exactly what happened and who did what, that workload automation tool gives you everything that it absolutely could find out about what happened so that you can do a better root cause analysis. When we think about how it works, Control-M is a very nice system to deploy. It doesn't take a lot of work. There are several components that would be used. The desktop client that we have been talking about briefly, and the Control-M self-service interface, which is the web service monitoring interface, or I should say the web-based monitoring interface, and Workload Change Manager, which is the application development interface. All of these things work with the Enterprise Manager. It's there to do the correlation of all of the information that happens. All of the log and output information can be stored in a workload archive so that you can store it longer, hold it for longer periods of time, and have different retention periods for different types of workload based on any kind of filter that you wish to apply. The job name, the application, the group, the Control-M server it ran on, the host that it ran on. All these types of things are all retention periods that are, I should say, retention rules that allow you to set up retention periods to hold that output, that log information, that output information that Control-M collects for a longer period. The schedules themselves are run. All of the things that we load, all of the objects that come in, all of the workflows that get loaded into the day, based on whatever the individual loading strategy is, all are run by a Control-M server, and that's what the Control-M for DS and Control-M for ZOS is. This is an enterprise-wide scheduler, or I should say workload automation tool, as I should remind everyone, which means that I have the ability to have applications that span different types of specific third-party applications, third-party servers, different types of operating systems. All of these things are managed in an enterprise way so that the application developer has the plethora of all of the things in your enterprise at their fingertips to use if they need to use them. All of the executions are done by agents. Agents can live on the machines themselves. We also have the ability to run work over remote hosts, or connections over SSH and WMI, so I don't necessarily have to put a piece of infrastructure on a given machine to run work on it. And we also have those control modules, those integrations to the third-party systems that allow us to have that object orientation that every application developer is looking for. And those things are also hosted at the agent level to do that bridging between myself and Hadoop, or myself and Informatica, or any of the others that we've talked about.